The City of Angels has a way of collecting beautiful, broken things, polishing them with the glitter of promise until they shine, only to shatter them against the cold, hard pavement of reality. And on the morning of January 15th, 1947, in a vacant lot on Norton Avenue in Los Angeles, the city presented its most horrifying masterpiece. A young woman's body, severed cleanly at the waist, was posed with a grotesque elegance, her pale skin gleaming under the weak winter sun. Her face was frozen in a Glasgow smile, a brutal slash from the corners of her mouth to her ears, creating a monstrous, eternal grin. She was utterly drained of blood, her intestines tucked neatly beneath her buttocks, her body meticulously washed and cleaned. To the world, she would soon become known as the Black Dahlia, a name that would echo through the decades as a synonym for unspeakable violence. But before she was a headline, before she was a cautionary tale, she was Elizabeth Short, a girl from a small town in Massachusetts, who dreamed in silver screen technicolor. Elizabeth, or Beth as her family called her, was a vision of post-war aspiration. With her jet-black hair, alabaster skin, and eyes the color of a twilight sky, she looked like she had stepped right out of a studio portrait. She favored black clothing, black dresses, black sweaters, black lacy gloves, a choice that would later be woven into the macabre tapestry of her myth. Life, however, was a patchwork of hardship and fantasy. Her father's apparent suicide during the Great Depression, a trauma that was later undercut when he was found alive and well in California, had fractured her family. Beth chased that California dream herself, a moth drawn to the flickering light of Hollywood. She drifted between cities, living on charm and the generosity of the men she met, her life a series of rented rooms and borrowed time. She spoke of a fiancé, a Major Matt Gordon, who was tragically killed in the war, a story whose truth was as ephemeral as she was. Friends described her as sweet but deeply sad, a girl playing a part she couldn't quite afford. Her entire existence a performance for a role that never materialized. Her final days were a blur of bus stations, cocktail lounges, and fleeting connections. In December of 1946, she was in San Diego. Then she returned to L.A., staying at the swanky Biltmore Hotel, a world away from the emptiness she felt inside. She told a roommate she was going to meet a man named Red, a man she had argued with before. A bartender last remembered serving her a drink, after which she walked out into the Los Angeles night and vanished. For nearly a week there was only silence. Then the discovery in the lot. The brutality was so extreme, so calculated, that it immediately separated this crime from the common violence of the city. This wasn't a crime of passion, it was a dissection. It was a statement. The investigation, led by the LAPD's toughest detectives, was immediately overwhelmed, not just by the horror of the crime, but by the sheer volume of false confessions and crackpot tips it inspired. The sensational nickname the Black Dahlia, coined by an enterprising reporter mixing her favored black attire with the then-popular film asterisk, the Blue Dahlia asterisk, ensured the case would be front-page news, a circus of public obsession that both helped and hindered the probe. The killer, it seemed, was playing a game. A week after the murder, an envelope arrived at the asterisk Los Angeles Examiner asterisk. Inside was Elizabeth Short's birth certificate, her social security card, an address book, and a note. The letters meticulously cut and pasted from newsprint. "Here is Dahlia's belongings," it read. Letter to follow. The evidence had been cleaned with gasoline, erasing any hope of fingerprints. It was a taunt, a direct communication from the abyss. The press had its golden ticket, and the public had its monster. Detectives followed a labyrinth of leads that twisted and turned into dead ends. They interrogated over 150 suspects, men whose pathologies painted a grim portrait of the city's underbelly. There was the slick-talking salesman, the mentally unstable doctor, the wealthy socialite with a sadistic streak. One of the most promising early suspects was a man named Leslie Dillon, a bellhop with medical knowledge and a criminal past. But the evidence was circumstantial, a collection of threads that refused to weave into a noose. The case grew cold, the initial frenzy giving way to a frustrated silence. The file on Elizabeth Short, now thousands of pages thick, was shelved, a monument to an unanswered question. But the ghost of the Black Dahlia would not rest. Her story was too potent, her image too haunting. She became a dark star in the American firmament, and her murder a template. Years turned into decades. The official investigation stalled, but the cultural fascination with the Black Dahlia only intensified. She was the subject of books, films, and endless speculation. And then, in the most chilling of ways, her story began to replicate itself. Not in a single copycat, but in a series of dark echoes. Murders that seemed to borrow the Dahlia's terrible signature, proving that her killer had not just ended a life, but had planted a seed of profound evil that would bear bitter fruit for generations to come. In 1967, 20 years after Elizabeth Short was found, the body of a 23-year-old woman named Reet Jurvetson was discovered in the hills of Los Angeles. The location was different, but the horror was a sickeningly familiar refrain. She was stabbed dozens of times, her body left exposed to the elements. Most strikingly, her face bore the same horrific Glasgow smile. The investigators on the scene, men who knew the lore of the LAPD, felt a cold dread. It was as if the ghost of 1947 had returned. The Jurvetson case, while never officially solved, remains for many a haunting coda, a potential copycat act by a killer inspired by the city's most infamous cold case. The echoes grew louder, crossing state lines and decades. In 1981, in the quiet town of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, a 19-year-old girl named Sherry Miller disappeared after a night out with friends. Her car was found abandoned, its interior stained with her blood. For weeks, the community searched, hoping for a miracle. That miracle never came. Instead, with the spring thaw, a gruesome discovery was made. Sherry's body was found in a creek, weighted down with rocks. She had been stabbed over 70 times. And carved into her flesh, from the corners of her mouth towards her jawline, were the unmistakable, savage cuts of a Glasgow smile. The local police were baffled. This level of mutilation was unheard of in their peaceful community. But for one detective, a student of true crime history, the connection was instantaneous and horrifying. He looked at the crime scene photos and didn't see just Sherry Miller. He saw the ghost of Elizabeth Short. The investigation into Sherry's murder led to a man named David Lycan, a local farmer with a violent temper. He was arrested, and while in custody, he confessed to a separate assault on another young woman. He spoke of Sherry, too, with a chilling casualness. But a full confession for her murder remained elusive. The evidence was strong, but largely circumstantial. He was tried, but the trial ended in a hung jury. The shadow of doubt and the lack of a definitive closure meant Sherry Miller's case, like Elizabeth Short's, was left to fester in the realm of the unresolved. Killer, it seemed, had learned from the Dahlia script, understanding that such theatrical violence could paralyze an investigation, leaving behind a mystery that would never fully be put to rest. The most profound and personal echo, however, came not from a new murder, but from a deathbed confession that threatened to rewrite history itself. In 2013, a retired LAPD detective, Steve Hodel, published a bombshell theory. His own father, Dr. George Hill Hodel, a prominent and sophisticated Los Angeles physician, was, he claimed, the Black Dahlia Avenger. Steve Hodel had come across a photograph in his father's personal effects after his death, a picture of a young woman who bore a striking resemblance to Elizabeth Short. His investigation, detailed in his book, painted a portrait of a brilliant, monstrous man with surgical knowledge, a history of sexual violence, and connections to the surrealist art world, which could explain the posed artistic nature of the crime. He presented voice recordings of his father, secretly taped by the police in 1950, where George Hodel can be heard saying, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead." The LAPD had suspected Hodel intensely, even planting a bug in his home, but they never had the evidence for an arrest. For Steve Hodel, the case was closed. The killer was his own father. This revelation was the climax the world had been waiting for, a shocking turn that tied the entire saga into a horrifying, intimate bow. It was no longer a story about a random monster lurking in the shadows, but one about a monster hiding in plain sight, a man of wealth and taste who committed the perfect crime and escaped justice. His secret guarded for decades by the one man who had sworn to uphold it, his own son, a homicide detective. The ultimate betrayal, the ultimate twist. The idea was almost too cinematic to bear. Yet the LAPD has never officially endorsed Hodel's theory, and many historians and journalists remain skeptical, pointing to inconsistencies and the lack of physical proof. The truth, it seems, is as fractured as Elizabeth Short's life. Whether it was George Hodel, or Leslie Dillon, or some other phantom lost to time, the core horror remains unchanged. Elizabeth Short's murder was a seismic event in the landscape of American crime, a rupture so deep that its aftershocks are still felt today. She was a victim twice over, first of a killer's knife, and then of a world that was all too eager to consume her tragedy as entertainment, to turn her pain into a legend, her death into a brand. Her story is a dark mirror, reflecting our own fascination with the abyss. It reminds us that some mysteries are never meant to be solved, that some wounds never truly heal, and that the most beautiful dreams can curdle into the most enduring nightmares. She was a girl who wanted to be a star, and in the most terrible way imaginable she got her wish, her name forever etched, not in the marquee lights of Hollywood, but in the grim, permanent ink of true crime history. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.